This additional funding, extending this for a year, I am told would significantly help in fill more of those positions. From a prosecutor perspective, of the 40 positions, we have had as many as 23 filled. Right now we have 21. Those 21 are clearly making a difference with regard to COVID backlog cases. We have identified a time frame that we're considering COVID backlog, both for prosecutors and public defenders, and I'm told they are making significant progress. To project, Representative Kavanaugh, whether that could be completely resolved in a year, I don't think there's any way we can tell for sure. I can give you a couple of examples of specific jurisdictions if that would help, just to kind of show where we're at. For example, Washington County, which is the Fayetteville area in the 4th Judicial District, they have assigned and disposed of 264 cases that were COVID backlog cases since they hired someone beginning on April 1st. And we have similar stories in different parts throughout the state. But to give you a guarantee that the backlog would be completely taken care of, I think it'd be too hard to predict at this time. But I'm told we are making significant progress in those jurisdictions that have been able to hire people. And I'll be happy to answer other questions. I hope that helped a little bit.
And this is Greg Parrish. I would basically mimic what Bob said. We've been able to hire a few more people because of the need, but the concentration has been solely on the COVID cases within the per curiam order. I've spoken with judges from here all over the state. Judge Watley, who was instrumental in helping us get these funds, who's now a judge. Great success in her courtroom. Judge Compton's, likewise in Fayetteville and South Arkansas as well. So we've distributed these positions as widely as we can over the state where there are attorneys available. And that's been a problem that I know Bob and I both have. We've just been able to not hire people in certain locations because there's no one available. But we have made significant progress. To say that we will be out of the weeds this time next year, I can't say that because a lot of it depends upon the ability of judges to have trials to get these people in front of a jury and make something happen. So while they're still trying to handle their current caseload.
Now, Ms. Larry Walter again, the funding we're talking about here is for fiscal year 2023, and we will need to make a decision as we develop the budget for 24-25 over the next few months, how much will be required in 24 or 25, because we're the end of this fiscal year will be June 30th of 2023, which really isn't that far off. So whether you'll have to make some estimates of what your requirements will be in 24 and 25, and we can deal with that in the budget that we will hear in January of this coming year.
Senator Hammer has a question.
I have a question from Senator Hammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob or Greg, either one, will this have a direct correlation to relieving the backup in the county jail by getting these cases handled?
I'll answer that. I will say yes, definitely, because the backlog in the jails, we can only see so many people a day with the public defenders either going to jail or by virtual. And these extra positions have enabled these attorneys who concentrate on the COVID cases. And that's what we're talking about, are the serious cases typically where the people are remaining in jail. And the sooner we can get somebody to them, the sooner we can get in front of a judge, the sooner we can address that case and either get that person sent to the ADC if he's convicted or she's convicted, or get them released if there's something worked out on the case. So it's a benefit to the counties as well.
I would agree.
Yeah, please.
What is the total caseload right now, the numbers that you're working on? What's the total number? Do you have that?
No, sir. I don't have any way to predict what that total number is. We have identified through the per curiam orders, calling a case a COVID related backlog from March of 2020 through the end of May 2021. So we have identified that period of time using the Supreme Court's per curiam for when the in-person proceedings had stopped for the most part. So that's our time frame, but I don't have a total number in terms of how many cases have been filed during that time or how many have been disposed of. I just have things coming in for me from specific judicial districts. But if I might help explain where the backlog occurred, it's not that, unfortunately, crimes were still being committed, cases were still being worked, charges were still filed. The backlog occurred because when you get to the actual disposition of the case with in-person proceedings coming to a close because of the per curiam, cases weren't being able to be tried. And as you probably know, if cases aren't being tried, then cases are not also being pled out. So the system was working as normal up until the actual disposition. And with the inability to have a jury trial led to the inability of making pleas, that led to the backlog. And Greg may have something to add to that, but I hope that kind of clears up how we got to the backlog.
Oh, that's good. It's going to help the backlog in the jails as well as trying to drive home. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Okay, Secretary Consent, please.
I think based on what we're hearing, I think a number of the backlog, I think the volume certainly is something that we're going to need to look at. And I think what would be helpful, first of all, I'm very supportive of the proposal. I am very supportive of the proposal. But what I think would be helpful to the committee is that we get a number of the backlog, that we quantify the backlog. And I know that it's difficult to quantify the backlog because we've got ongoing cases. But I think what would be beneficial to this committee is if we just establish, say, a cutoff date, and let's say the cutoff date was at the disposition date, then that would give us some idea of what the level of the backlog is, and then to help us determine just the volume here. And I think that's what we have to probably consider here. We have to have a number. We've got to somehow quantify the volume of the backlog, and I think probably the disposition dates would help in that manner.
And if I could address that, Secretary Bassett, when we started this back earlier this year, we did go to the AOC to get those numbers. And what Bob has said, what were the filings, the number of filings per the state between March of 2020 until May of 2021 when we started back. And we had those numbers and it was in the thousands, and I can go back and get them for you. But what we need to do now is go back to AOC and have them run those numbers again, and they can tell us the dispositions as well. So we can get that specific number. And I just cannot remember, but I know it was in the thousands. I think Pulaski alone had probably 3,000 cases.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. And I think the members of the committee would appreciate that, but I don't see that as being something that should hold up this proposal, because clearly we have a backlog and we need people out there to work that backlog.
Yeah.
But I just think it'd be helpful if we had those numbers.
Yes, sir. And as Greg said, I guess we can contact I believe the individual at the AOC is Mr. Scott Graves, kind of heads up that department, and have Mr. Graves take the numbers that he originally provided. And as Greg said, run them again for those filed and the dispositions of those cases. And we could at least get a little better handle on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Are there any additional questions? Yeah, who was that? Who wants to ask a question?
Senator Ingram.
Is that Senator Ingram? Is that you? Senator Ingram, I don't hear you. I think it was you that wanted to ask a question. Yeah, your mic was muted. Senator Ingram.
Yes.
Senator Ingram, you have a bad connection. We're having trouble, at least I'm having trouble understanding what your question. Senator Ingram, if you would text me your question, I would be more than happy to relay it to the total group. I apologize for the delay. I would like to know what Senator Ingram's question was, but we can get that answered. Hello.
Anybody else has a question?
Yeah. Does anyone else have a question that we could respond to? Here I've got. Okay, Senator Ingram is interested in knowing the breakout of positions between judicial districts. Do y'all have that?
Yes, sir. I do have that for the prosecutors. You want me to go ahead and go through how we got
Yes,
to that?
please.
We
Please
had
do.
I surveyed all 28 elected prosecutors. Each one represents their own judicial district. 22 of our 28 judicial districts acknowledged a backlog and then made a request to the prosecutor board. And so the breakdown by district, like I said, there's only 22 districts that would have been granted the authority to hire these positions. There was, again, 6 districts said they did not have a backlog, and therefore they didn't make it.
Hey, pretty girl.
They didn't make a request. So my breakdown is, again, is there a specific district you just want me to go down all 28? I can do that real quick if you'd like, but
Let me say this, Senator Ingram said if you could provide that before a peer, that would be okay.
yes, sir, no problem. I have a document right here, and I can send that. And just so the committee will know, these individuals help positions. They have specific requirements to how many number of hours they work and what their salaries are, and that is consistent. Both Greg and I are following those same guidelines, so that anyone that's hired as extra help through his commission or my office is making the same amount of money and required to work the same amount of time. But I can certainly provide that a document with that, and it is spread out. I mean, there's one district that has 5. Probably the average request was 2, 1 or 2. But there are a couple of districts that have as many as 4 and 5, and obviously those are our bigger judicial districts. But I will provide that document. Is there a specific person I need to send it to?
If you'll provide it to me, I will provide it to the entire committee.
Okay, no problem.
Likewise, I'll do the same.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Are there any more questions? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion for the approval of the prosecutor coordinator request for $4.5 million.
Hey, it's Stacy Hurst. I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you. May I have a second? Second. All right, we have a second. Any additional questions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now I would entertain a motion for the Public Defender Commission, $4.5 million.
Stacy Hurst, I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
Ken Ferguson, I second that motion.
Thank you, Representative Ferguson. Any questions? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Both motions have been passed. The next issue we have before us is a request from Secretary Westward concerning water and wastewater. So I would like to now turn the meeting over to Secretary Ward.
Okay, well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And so we do have a presentation for everyone, and I'm happy to give as much background and dig as deep as anyone would like, but I'll kind of be general in my remarks and then can come back and answer questions if that's helpful. But just a little bit of background. Last year when the governor created working groups for 3 separate working groups, one of those was for water and other infrastructure projects. We worked together as a group. We've got a presentation that hopefully each of y'all have received. But during that process, we put out a needs assessment throughout the state of Arkansas. And what that resulted in was over 1,400 responses demonstrating over $5 billion worth of water and wastewater needs across the state. Unfortunately, the coronavirus and the impacts of the virus and the need to respond to that wasn't able to move forward with funding last year, but with the second tranche of funding, hoping to be able to use funding from the American Rescue Plan to help address some of these needs across the state. So what we have is a proposal for the steering committee that represents $135 million for water projects, $135 million for wastewater and stormwater projects, $5 million for the Rock River Irrigation District, $5 million for the Bahamita Irrigation District, and then 2 separate projects for the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission for a fish hatchery and for the Bahamita Wildlife Management Area. So total for those requests totals $300 million. It's $270 for water and wastewater projects, $10 million for irrigation, and $20 million for game and fish projects. But happy to go deeper into any of those as you would like, Mr. Chairman.
We provided the slides that you gave us earlier this week to the committee. I hope everyone was following what you were saying. Now, one thing that you might do is talk about the process that you will use to select the final projects that we would be funding out of the $300 million.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. It's a great question. So within the Department of Agriculture and our Natural Resources Division, we've got existing programs for water and wastewater that provide financing and principal forgiveness and loans for those sort of projects. We've got dedicated staff and teams that work on this all the time. So our proposal is to use a very similar process. The eligibility for under the American Rescue Plan is the same as what those our current existing programs use. So what we would do, and then our presentation, we've got that included on page 11, I believe, that kind of shows our timeline of what that would look like. So our anticipated plan is that we would get a favorable recommendation from the steering committee today that would go to ALC next week through peer on Tuesday and full ALC next Friday, hopefully get review and approval there. Following the legislature's approval of the plan, we would open a 50-day application process that would allow everyone a fair chance at applying for this water and wastewater funding. From there, we would do a 21-day, about 3-week review of those applications. We've got eligibility criteria that was established by the working group. Again, making sure that they're eligible for the American Rescue Plan. We would go through, we would score those, make sure they're eligible, and then rank those, in a very fair and transparent process there. Following that review, we would submit those to our Natural Resources Commission. That's the same process we use for our existing programs. And then the Natural Resources Commission would make a decision on which projects to fund. But we would, our team and our staff, in conjunction with ADQ and Department of Health, who have people who also work on water and wastewater projects, would go through, evaluate, score those, and present those to the Natural Resources Commission. And anticipated early November timeframe. Natural Resources Commission, upon their approval, then we'd be able to turn around and start getting funding out for these projects throughout the state.
Thank you, Secretary Ward. Are there any questions from the committee?
Larry, I have a question.
Please, Senator Sample.
Mr. Ward, does the Natural Resource Commission not have the money to fund these rather than using ARP money?
So it's a very good question, sir. So we do have, as part of that presentation, we included a slide that kind of shows what our current existing programs do. That's on page 12, I believe, that shows our current existing programs and the funding. So we do, over the last 3 years, we've done almost $500 million. Only 41 million of that has been in loans and grants and principal forgiveness. The rest has been through low interest loans. So there is some mechanisms that do exist through existing programs to help with water and wastewater. But what we've seen and what we've heard from other legislators, as well as water and wastewater systems throughout the state, is just that It's just not enough to cover that $5 billion worth of identified need. And that a lot of these entities, may be eligible for a loan, but it's, challenging to raise the rates to pay for those water and wastewater systems without additional grant assistance. And that's essentially what we would be requesting through the American Rescue Plan funding is this $270 million worth of grants that would significantly make a dent in those projects throughout the state. A very, very good question, sir.
Ward, would you comment on your program as it deals with additional funding from other sources that would complement the money from ARP?
Yes, sir. Another great point. So, we do know across the state of Arkansas, and it's literally the entire state, that there's no region specific or area specific. It's the entire state that has water and wastewater needs that represent that over $5 billion that we've identified. So we have the current and existing programs that provide some financing support, whether through low interest loans or grants. Hopefully, favorable approval of American Rescue Plan grant program that will also assist. And then we'll have what we've been identified as funding through the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that will provide additional funding. So taken together, what we anticipate with all of those aspects is over $600 million worth of water and wastewater financing, but more specifically, about a little over $400 million that will be available over the next 5 years combined to address water and wastewater needs. So this $270 million would go away in helping these projects throughout the state be financially viable and be able to move forward.
Thank you for that answer. Committee, the Secretary Ward has mentioned a couple of times a number of between $5 and $6 billion. And when he put the study group together last year, they assessed the requirements that were out there on a preliminary basis, and he received between $5 and $6 billion worth of projects that might meet the ARP requirements. ARP is designed for a lot of different things, but it also specifically addresses water, wastewater, from drinking water and wastewater. And so that's why we put together a study group specifically to look at this aspect of the spending of ARP money. And his program is designed to identify the projects on a competitive basis, but also where he's also leveraging money from other sources, including the state money, that will allow us to start working for getting as many of these projects accomplished as possible. So that's sort of the why we're where we are here. And there's been some discussion within the legislature about water, wastewater, and concerns about moving this project on because of the timing it takes to get these projects done. They do require significant lead time. So those are the sorts of things that sort of go into wanting to get this in front of the legislature, and so we can move it as quickly as we can. Are there any more questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Please, Representative Kavanaugh.
Secretary Ward, when we had the meeting, I think it was about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, we were talking, and all the wastewater and rural water people came and did the presentation to city, county, local. And when we left that, we were personally, I was thinking that we would probably ask for about $300 million to kind of help with these grant projects. But in your request, there's 20 million of it going to game and fish. And I understand why it's in here, because it does help with some other projects going along the line. Why are we not just doing 300 million to these wastewater and drink water projects, and then just the 20 million for the game and fish projects? Why are we taking that away from the rural departments and the city department municipalities?
Yes, ma'am, and I'll try to answer that the best that I can, but I may defer some of that to Secretary Walther. But I think to Secretary Walther's point, I think we're what we're trying to do with that 270 million for water and wastewater and 10 for irrigation projects and even 20 for the game and fish is more specific on the water and wastewater is to have a kind of a collaborative combined effect with existing programs, American Rescue Plan and IIJA funding, and to all work together to really amplify and expand that as far as we can. But I don't know if Secretary Walter wants to, or DFNA wants to comment on overall funding allocation, but I would agree with his comments earlier. We're trying to take this 200 million work in conjunction with the existing and additional funding to make that go as far as possible.
Representative Kavanaugh and the steering committee, this is, we're looking at an amount of money about what's the total number, Alan? $876 million that we have to do the entire out of the ARP that's left to fund projects. And so it's a judgment call as to how much you put within one category or the other. And so we've sat down, we've analyzed it, we've met with the governor, and we believe that we have a reasonable amount of money to approach to spend on the water and wastewater program. That's it. It's a balancing act. We're trying to balance it with other projects. We're also trying to keep some money aside in case we have some emergency that is unforeseen. So that's our recommendation at this point in time.
Okay, well, my concern is, and I'm supportive of this, the request, but I think that we need to give them the full 300 million and not cut them short, because as we said, we're looking at $5 billion worth of needs, and we're going to throw $270 million at it. I mean, we need to give them the 300, and then if the game and fish, which I think is also needed, we can do 320. I mean, and I realize that we've got a certain amount left, but I also realize that this is one of the main projects that it would need to be used for, because we're talking about the health and safety of Arkansans. And, we have citizens with brown water, and we need to do what we can to help alleviate part of that problem. That's one of our key things, as I do believe as a government, that we're supposed to help. And, I think cutting it short with 270, I think we need to give them the full 320 million rather than 300.
Well, I don't feel comfortable making a change in the request at this point in time, from my point of view. It's not, that doesn't mean that it can't be done at a later time. If the committee so chooses, if y'all wanted to raise this to $320 million, I suppose we could move forward with that. But I don't personally feel like I could do that on my own accord.
Mr. Chairman, this
Yes.
is Daryl Bassett. I don't think that would be proper for us to amend the proposal. We've got a proposal here for 300 million, and I'm supportive of the 300 million, but also I'm sensitive to the fact that there's 20 million here for game and fish. I think, that should be submitted in a separate proposal. I don't think we need to be altering an established proposal that's coming before the committee. I'm supportive of the 300 million. If we need an additional, if it's the will of the committee to do an additional amount for game and fish or whatever, that's fine. But we've got a $300 million proposal here. It establishes what that $300 million is. We're called here today to decide on that. I think that's what we need to do. But aside from that, my I'm very supportive of the proposal. But again, Secretary Ward, again, I'm supportive of the proposal, but can you speak to the sustainability of this? We've got $1 billion in need. This is going to be a shot in the arm. How are we going to address the sustainability of this? Because again, this is just one-time funds. What are we doing in that regard?
That's an excellent question, and part of our eligibility and scoring criteria includes an aspect for just readiness. It includes an aspect for regionalization, modernization. So that's an effort by us and by the working group as we kind of looked at the need of recognizing and agreeing with you that you can throw good money after bad, and you may have a project that may need a little bit more in order to regionalize to make it more stable into the future, as opposed to just fixing a problem that 5 years from now is going to be a problem again. You have to throw more money at. So we agree with you. We've got that as part of our eligibility and scoring criteria, and that's our effort to try to address your question.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Kavanaugh and committee. Another possibility would be we approve it as it is, but that we then go back and look to see if we can come up with another $30 million for water and wastewater to pursue to allow us to get it to the 300 million. Would that be okay, Representative Kavanaugh?
Yeah, I would. I just don't want them. We've got so much of a need out there, and I just want to make sure that we give them every opportunity that they can do, because it's a real concern. And I understand why the 20 million for game and fish is really kind of included in this request, because it does affect with some drinking water, and I don't have any trouble with that. But that's a big chunk of that money going to just a couple of projects. When if we could get the other 20 million, then we can spread it more around the state to help these people that need just $1 million, 2 million or something, because they can make a huge difference to communities, and especially in rural Arkansas.
What I'd like to do is to approve the plan as presented and then work toward getting the additional $20 million. Any other questions? Okay, do we have a recommendation? We have a motion to approve the proposal of Secretary Westmore.
Secretary Hurst here. I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Okay.
This is AJ. I'll second.
Okay, thank you, AJ. Any additional comments? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
Who was that? Was that
Sample?
Sample, okay. Thank you.
Larry, I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
I keep worrying about the money that we spent for our tax reduction, and keep worrying about us having to pay some of this back. And if we're going to have enough money by spending this 300 million like this, if we're going to have enough money to pay back in case we have to pay back.
Okay, Paul Gehring is here who can address that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Senator Sample. As we discussed in last week's meeting of Senate Revenue and Tax, DFA has reviewed the Treasury guidance regarding the recoupment of ARPA funding as a result of the safe harbor provisions of the Treasury rules. So we did a very deep analysis of the litigation that is ongoing that the state of Arkansas is a party to in the state of Alabama before the federal district court in Alabama. Just to give the steering committee a short briefing of that case, the several states, including Arkansas, challenged the recoupment provision of the American Rescue Plan and the Treasury guidance that was issued. The states were successful in the federal district court in having the tax mandate, which provides for the possible recoupment of ARPA funds, that it was unconstitutional. The Treasury has appealed that federal district court decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals. But we, in conversations with our counsel at the Arkansas Attorney General's office, it's our determination, and the AG concurs with us, is that the possibility of recoupment of ARPA funds as a result of the state of Arkansas reducing its tax burden on its citizens is to be remote. Also, along that same lines, that even if the tax mandate of the American Rescue Plan is ultimately upheld in the Circuit Court of Appeals or in the United States Supreme Court, the state of Arkansas is not using ARPA funds to either directly or indirectly pay for tax cuts. The tax cuts that we enacted, or the General Assembly enacted last week, we are paying for those tax cuts out of surplus revenues where we are over collecting tax. An example of where ARPA funds were being used incorrectly, or that tax cuts were being used to offset a spending reduction that would possibly trigger the recoupment, would be that if the state budget had specific line items for these water improvement programs or other uses of ARPA funds, and then we eliminated those appropriations in our budget, and then turned around and used ARPA money at the same time that we were cutting taxes. So just to sum up, we are not using ARPA funds incorrectly under the Treasury guidance. But also we are, so if the tax mandate is ultimately upheld, we are not in violation of the tax mandate, but we also feel like as though the tax mandate which has been invalidated by the Alabama Federal District Court will likely be sustained in terms of the finding of the Federal District Court. The Circuit Court of Appeals would likely find that the tax mandate was unconstitutional, and of course, it would likely be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. But we feel like the state's argument, the legal argument that tax mandate is constitutional, is correct. But I'd be happy to answer any questions about recruitment or the lawsuit.
Well, Paul, I mean, a month ago, y'all were worried about us having to repay $800 million, and we were in that. We were a party to that lawsuit then, and so I'm trying to figure out why that there's been a reversal of the role of the thinking. When you said a month ago we were going to probably be around 100 million, and now you're saying zero, and so I'm trying to figure out
Sure.
how I should take that.
Of course. Yes, Senator, it's a very good question. So the way that here at DFA, we were looking at what the Treasury has provided is essentially a test, safe harbor test, that you can cut 1% of your state revenues or collections from taxes, and that's de minimis. That's not subject to, that doesn't trigger any type of recoupment. But the safe harbor test is based upon 2019 revenues of each state, and those revenues are then scaled consistent with what the inflation is, the inflation rate, which has gone up to 8-9% in the U.S. So that has magnified what we perceived as the risk. the potential risk of recoupment. But when we took a very close look at the Treasury guides and looked at all the litigation that was pending and talked to our counsel, the Attorney General, and also our sister states that were dealing with the same issue, the conclusion that we came to yet that we have a risk that we have to report to the Treasury every year when we cut taxes of what we have done with our state budget and our taxes. But the second part of that analysis involves is that whether or not we are using the ARPA funds either directly or indirectly to offset a tax cut or a spending change. So we've always looked at this issue in terms of what our potential risk of recoupment would be. But the conclusion that we have come to in the last, when we were looking at this announcing and going through with a special session to look at tax cuts, what we really focused upon is that is the state either going to be subject to recoupment is if the tax mandate is upheld, or whether or not we also are going to be subject to is the tax mandate just going to be completely reversed and never have any risk either way. So looking at those two issues, we did a very close look at all of the litigation that we can review on the recoupment or the clawback under the Treasury and the ARPA. And ultimately, we decided that in full consultation with our counsel, with the Attorney General's office, that the risk of recoupment was remote or minimal or close to zero.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Sample. Are there any other questions? Okay, now, Secretary Gillespie, are you on the line? Secretary Gillespie.
Yes, sorry, I had to get off.
Okay, what I'd like to do now is ask Secretary Gillespie to address rural hospital and healthcare needs. We have had a request from the Hospital Association as well as the Rural Hospital Association having to do with ARP funding, and we just received one from the Hospital Association, I believe last week or week before last, and we're still evaluating it, but we thought it would be appropriate to give you a heads up and get a brief explanation from Secretary Gillespie, who is part of the team evaluating the request. So Senator, I've done that before. Secretary Gillespie, please proceed.
Sure. I just wanted to, and I appreciate the opportunity just to give the committee a heads up that we will be coming back and asking for a meeting, hopefully in early first week of September with the committee to talk about some proposals that we are working on. There's a couple of things that have come up. First of all, we've gotten an actual proposal in from the Rural Health Partnership to help work with a lot of the rural hospitals around a range of issues that have come out post-COVID, stem from COVID, not just issues around shortage of nurses, but a lot of the financial sustainability issues that are hitting hospitals down there now. And so we've got a proposal from them, and we're working tightly with DFNA and with RHP on that proposal, and hope to bring that to you. We're planning to pair that with another issue that has been raised to us by several in the legislature, as well as others. And we have asked the Hospital Association to provide us technical assistance in developing that proposal. It is not actually going to be their proposal. We do have some hospitals in the state that are in financial distress right now, coming out of the public health emergency. And so we're working with them and DFNA and the health department on how to put in place something that could help those hospitals that are in distress through this period. So and the distress coming from the COVID period. We've had some other healthcare related proposals or discussions of proposals that have also been coming to us. And we're going to try to wrap that up. Many of the issues that the healthcare community raises with us, we are trying to address as best we can through Medicaid rather than coming for ARPA monies. But we do have some things that Medicaid cannot pay for. And therefore, we are looking at those and we'll likely be packaging that up. This is just really a heads up that we're working across several areas. Do hope to be able to meet with you very, very shortly and get some proposals to you that you would have time to review well in advance. Thank you, Secretary Walker.
Thank you, Secretary Gillespie. Are there any questions of Secretary Gillespie?
Larry, I'd like to ask Secretary a question.
Please ask Senator Sample.
Why wasn't I've been hearing from pharmacies for a while. Why wasn't the pharmacy's request on your proposal, please?
Okay. Senator Sample, I was just, as you can probably tell, talking to Don and Mark here. I don't think we've seen that proposal, or at least I haven't. Mark and Don have not. So we will reach out. Mark, if you reach out to the Pharmacy Association and ask if we could see that proposal, please. Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
I have a question for Secretary Gillespie.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Do we have any idea how much of a request these might be to kind of help out the rural hospitals and the hospitals in distress?
I think the best way to answer that right now is I don't want to put a firm number out there, but I can assure you we are trying to work as hard as we can to keep the number as low as we can keep it. And I don't say that from the standpoint of not wanting to help, but just recognizing that, you know, as the committee has said many times since we were formed, there's already been a good bit of funding that has gone towards the medical community. And not just through ARPA and CARES, but through other sources. So we really are trying to, where we can use other sources to meet the needs, use other sources. I know that doesn't answer your question directly, but we really are trying to keep it as low as we can, ma'am.
And I guess we're looking at those in financial distress, even after they've received all their other monies, they're still in financial distress with possibility of closures and not being able to service the communities and areas they live in. I'm assuming that's probably a priority we're looking at.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It is really about distress at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, again, thank you, Secretary Gillespie. Are there any more issues to be brought before this committee today? Hearing none, I will declare this meeting to be adjourned. And I thank everyone for participating. Thank you.
Question. There's a group of legislators that are working on some proposals to